Endgame's converged endpoint security platform is transforming security programs, their people, processes, and technology with the most powerful endpoint protection and simplest user experience, ensuring analysts of any skill level can stop targeted attacks before information theft. Endgame unifies prevention, detection, and threat hunting to stop known and unknown attacker behaviors at scale with a single agent. For more information, visit endgame.com. Recorded Future. They help security teams make more confident decisions faster. Recorded Future's technology automates broad collection and analysis of cyber threat data and delivers the rich external context you need to understand alerts and emerging threats. With real-time threat intelligence from Recorded Future, security teams respond to threats 63% faster and find undetected threats 10 times quicker. To get started, go to recordedfuture.com/Security Weekly and sign up for the Recorded Future Cyber Daily. Every day, you'll receive an email with the top results for trending technical indicators, cyber news, exploited vulnerabilities, suspicious IP addresses, and more. Subscribe today and stay ahead of cyber attacks. Effectively securing your organization and its reputation requires a smarter approach. To maximize efficiency and minimize risk, security experts turn to LogRhythm, the only leading solution built solely for security teams by a security team committed to your success. With next-gen SIEM, user and entity behavior analytics, network traffic and behavior analysis, security automation and orchestration, and compliance, LogRhythm provides security made smarter. Welcome to our roundtable discussion on security versus compliance. Quick reminder for our listeners, every week we record Security and Compliance Weekly, featuring Jeff Mann, Josh Marpet, and Scott Lyons, covering all the latest compliance and security news, along with interviews with folks close to challenges and success stories in compliance today. You can subscribe to Security and Compliance Weekly and all of our shows on the Security Weekly Network by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe. Also, security is more important than compliance. Welcome, everyone, to this roundtable, Security versus Compliance. To my left, of course, is Mr. Larry Pesce. Yay! Sporting a very furry and ugly Christmas sweater. Very nice. Very nice.
Meow.
Matt Alderman is here with me as well.
Hola, everyone.
Mr. Jeff Mann is here. The host of, very nice, very nice.
Trek the halls. Trek the halls.
I approve.
Security and Compliance Weekly host. So Jeff Mann is here. Scott Lyons is here in studio.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
And me, us, me.
Whenever Josh is
All
here,
of you.
even remotely, you just say us.
Yes,
I know.
us.
It's
Yes.
fine.
Yeah,
I know you
that's-
can't hold hands right now, but it'll be okay.
Well, that's what I figured, you know?
Josh Marpet is on the lines remotely.
Yes,
as is Wendy Nather, is the head of advisory CISOs at Duo Security, now Cisco. Welcome, Wendy.
That's what they tell me.
Ron Gula is returning to this roundtable as well. He's the president at Gula Tech Adventures. Ron, welcome.
Hey, thanks. Can we go back to Jeff and Scott? I mean, we got a Star Wars, Star Trek Christmas battle going on.
We do.
It looks like,
We do.
right?
We have
Right?
a battle within the battle.
That is awesome.
You know, we did it just for you, Ron.
I appreciate that.
Alex Wood is remote with us. He is the CISO at Anschutz Corporation. Did I say that right? Close?
Yeah,
hey,
it's
everybody.
corporation.
How's it going? Thanks for having me. Anschutz, yes.
And shoots.
Jim Hightower, did I say that right?
That's right. Yep.
He's the VP Security at the Open Group. Jim, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
And it's interesting. I titled, who am I forgetting? April. April Wright is here with us. Because you know what I need to do? I need to scroll down to the hosts.
Yep.
Right.
Computering.
Because you need two more.
I need to learn how to use the scroll wheel, apparently.
So hard to
April
computer.
Wright is a preventative security specialist at architectsecurity.org. April, welcome.
And John.
And yes, thank you. Why am I forgetting to introduce people? Sorry. John Fredrickson is the Information Security and Privacy Officer at Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Rhode Island. And he is here in studio because he lives and works in Rhode Island.
Rhode Island. Yep.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
were
Yeah, happy to be here again.
yes. Outstanding. So I titled this Security versus Compliance. I thought we maybe first, are they really different things as the first question?
Well, yeah. I mean, security doesn't exist. It's all compliance.
Wow.
So Josh,
Wow,
now you
with
get
the opening salvo.
now you get to answer, well, what is security and what is compliance?
So security is, honestly, it's in the name. It's to make sure that things are safe and protected. I mean, I'm simplifying, but you get the idea. Compliance is there to make sure that the security people, as well as everybody else, do what they say they're going to do and meet the external regulatory requirements for those tasks, those functions, those business pieces, whatever. Okay? So security is the implementation of a compliance standard, as well as, if you're compliance minded, as well as performing them for security's sake alone.
Did you mean to say that? Because I thought you were going to say compliance is the implementation of your security standard.
It's not.
Okay, I
I
kind
would
of think it
disagree
is.
there. I think compliance is a very narrowly focused way of managing a particular security risk that's well understood and well scoped, in such a way that it can be, imposed on, that one size fits all, or as many as possible. So if you look at PCI DSS, it is scoped to manage the risk of a very well understood set of risks to a particular formatted string and its use in financial transactions. But outside of that, if you try to broaden the risk that you're trying to manage, compliance kind of falls apart. It has to be scoped in order to work.
And so does security.
Can we all agree that we need both?
Absolutely.
Yes.
No.
Yep.
Scott?
I think you're going to
He's being contrary.
I had to be contrary. I'm sorry.
As long as you have
okay.
regulations, right? There's going to be some you're going to have to comply with.
I'm sorry, Alex, start that again.
But so I was saying, as long as as there are regulations, you're going to have some level of compliance, right? Because people are requiring you to do certain things. Now, should we have both of those things? I think that's another question. Compliance is usually pretty narrowly scoped, and I think one of the reasons we get into these kind of debates is because security is so broad and compliance is usually pretty small.
See, I disagree with that. I don't think that compliance, at least in healthcare, is not narrowly scoped whatsoever. I don't think that there's anything narrow about the HIPAA security rule. Maybe PCI DSS, something like that was, focused and written in this, past 2 decades at least. But I don't think that most compliance frameworks are narrowly scoped at all.
But HIPAA is more privacy focused.
Well, there's the privacy rule and the security rule.
Yeah, but HIPAA doesn't have teeth to it. That's why High Trust was invented by United Healthcare.
HIPAA has teeth to it. The Office of Civil Rights will
HIPAA now
fine
has
you if
teeth
you're
to
not
it,
HIPAA
Scott.
compliant, right? So,
As of 2013, HIPAA has some pretty significant teeth, 1.5 million in fines per incident. So HIPAA has pretty significant teeth now. However, I think there's a lot of missing the point here. Forgive me. Even if you don't have an external regulatory regime, and I realize that I brought that up, so I will take the blame for that. But even if you don't have an external regulatory regime, you've focused your business so that you're not under HIPAA, you're not under PCI DSS, you're not under this, that, the other thing. And there's a lot of companies that try for that, right? You still have compliance or internal audit, call it what you will, because they're still checking to make sure that the security people are doing what they said they were going to do. They're the verifiers that security is doing its job. Period.
I think the where we're getting wrapped around the axle is the term compliance. I think a lot of people think of as regulatory compliance, right? There is a regulatory mandate that you need to comply with. But compliance, from a definition perspective, can be, do I comply with my internal policies and procedures, regulatory-based or not? And so,
yes, absolutely.
Right?
And you can be compliant with policies that are really, really stupid.
Yes.
So, compliance does not equal security in that case.
Correct.
Right. That's because the security people screwed up, because who writes the policies? The security people should be the one providing the data and the focus of the policies. Literally, compliance is, are you doing what you said you were going to do? So if you tell me you're going to count eggs, I'm going to say, did you count eggs? Yes. Does that have anything to do with security? No, but that's what you told me as the security subject matter expert that you were going to do.
Well, but doesn't a good security
if you're
program,
a chicken farmer, though.
But doesn't a good security program build in those integrity checks to make sure that if I'm applying controls, they're actually working?
Well, for sure, if you don't want to fail your compliance checks.
Yeah, now we come full
compliance.
circle.
Compliance kind of speaks to motivation in that context. I was thinking about it this morning.
And the word I was thinking of is watchdog. And in any organization, does there need to be a watchdog to make sure that a security program is executing? And do you want that watchdog to be the security program itself, the practitioners, whatever the construct is of the organization, or do you want it or need it? Sometimes you don't have a choice. Do you want it to be a sort of a third party that's more or less supposedly independent?
I want to point out that as you say watchdog, you've got a big guy with a cigar and a grim expression on his face sitting next to you. So I thought that was hilarious. Okay? There's just Scott going, yeah.
One of the things where I see difference is compliance can be a lot broader than security. When you look at some of the
security can be a lot broader than compliance.
It can be, right? It can work both ways.
Yep.
And so trying to equate the two get really difficult, I think, from a definition standpoint, because you look at a Gramm-Leach-Bliley or a Sarbanes-Oxley or a HIPAA, there are things in there that are much broader scope than security. They have security components to them. Some of them are very prescriptive, and some of them are not prescriptive at all, right? Left up to interpretation. And then you get into this interesting internal discussion, debate, etc. on, well, how do I interpret that? What controls do I have to put in place to meet the requirement because it wasn't prescriptive? And now you get into this, I think, where security and compliance start to diverge a little bit in some respects, right? And so, I can't define them as being equivalent because I don't think they are for lots of different reasons for scope on both sides.
I think there's a relationship there that I wanted to define.
There is a relationship,
right?
Though.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think it's complementary to the first gentleman that spoke. I mean, in my org, I have an org responsible for measuring how effective I am in executing on my security standards, and I have security operations, right? They both do report to me, but one is essentially measuring compliance of what I'm saying I'm going to do. And then I've got, of course, external compliance regulators, internal audit,
And who within your organization is loved and respected, and who is hated and loathed?
Honestly, the fact that the standards are actually written by security operations, it's not a love-hate relationship, right? I mean, if you said you're going to do something and you're not doing it, then it's not the compliance folks' fault, right? You either wrote it wrong or you just, you've got to reassess your team.
Well, when hashing out security and compliance, there are a lot of effectors that need to be taken into account, right? Both internal and external, right? Security says we're going to protect data, we're going to protect people, we're going to protect networks, we're going to protect systems so that we can keep producing money, which keeps the business running, right? Compliance comes in and then says, okay, security, you said you're going to do this, are you doing it, right? And that compliance, again, twofold, internal versus external, right? External would be SOX, GBLA, TLBA, HIPAA, whatever you have to do from a regulatory standpoint, and then the internal compliance and controls, right? How do you make sure that the machine keeps running, right? Are you checking the oil? Are you making sure that you stay at a certain mile per hour so as not to tax too many parts inside of the business itself, right? So in saying security versus compliance, it's security and compliance, right?
Well, if you
the two
think
almost
of
have to work hand in
compliance
hand.
If you think of compliance as being yet another, the risk of not being compliant as yet another business risk, security is about managing the business risk. If you consider non-compliance to be the most likely business risk, you're going to put a lot of effort into managing that risk and being compliant. So in a way, compliance is yet another business risk among all the other things that security has to manage.
And along those lines, Wendy, and I love that. And what I find, especially the past year or so, right, when we interview more mature organizations on the security spectrum, however you want to measure that, right, they tend to focus on security first and then look at how much they've covered their compliance and regulatory requirements, right? They're like, first, we have to protect the attack paths and do the technical stuff. And inherently from those controls, they're achieved a certain level of compliance. What I found is the less mature organizations tend to start with compliance as a starting point and work their way up towards security. And I think that's where a lot of the contention has been in the debate is we have to take into account where they are on the security maturity curve, right? We talked about ways to measure that. Mm-hmm. But I think that's a big factor that I often find we miss or leave out because it's more fun to debate it without it. But
you're right. And there are a lot of organizations that don't believe in the hacker as a threat, but they sure do believe in the auditor as a threat. So they're going to manage to the auditor threat before they start worrying about hackers.
Well, that means that education hasn't been properly performed.
Education where?
And how do you perform that education? Do you prefer an aluminum bat or a wooden bat? I think the aluminum bat is more hygienic because you can clean it more easily.
I prefer the
wooden. Put some thought into that. That's kind of scary.
I prefer Lucille.
You can buff the dents out with an aluminum bat. You can never get the dents out. It's such a pain in the ass.
Lucille, that's all I'm saying.
See, there's a good point.
Look, and by the way, I'd like to address what you said about mature organizations versus immature organizations. We've run into a lot of very, very mature organizations, from financial to healthcare, that had fantastic security, maybe a few gaps here and there, but fantastic security overall. They were doing things really, really well, but they didn't have anything formalized. It wasn't written down. It was all tribal knowledge, if you will. And so it was fascinating that they were doing compliance because they had procedures, even if they were literally oral history type procedures, if you know what I mean. But they just didn't have it formalized. We've also run into smaller companies that, like you said, ran to compliance first and didn't run to security first because they needed a structure to build around. And that's a valid way to do it. So it's not a bad thing. It's just, I don't know which direction to go. There's 40 people, because I get, how many salesmen do you get calls from these days? I've got salesmen from 100 companies calling me. I don't know which direction to go. There's no silver bullet because I keep hearing that. What do I do? Well, if you get NIST CSF and do a risk management assessment, it can help you guide you down, especially with the cyber defense matrix they've got done by Sunil Yu. There's a lot of guidance there on what you should be buying, or at least the types of categories you should be looking at.
I find it interesting that compliance is a risk, as we've established. If you're not compliant, there's a certain risk to the business. If you are compliant, it's a business driver. I think largely what we've learned from Jason right on Business Security Weekly is that if we can document, like Josh said, we've got a great security program, right? But now let's do this compliance piece. Now we've got a piece of paper, a document that when we go do business with other people, they recognize that. And that's a business driver. And that's a positive aspect of compliance that a lot of security people may not recognize as being a benefit.
You know,
it's going to be a big-time requirement pretty soon for any DoD vendor, right? You got the cybersecurity maturity model certification, right? CMMC. Yep. And that one's awesome because it's just level 1 through 5. Level 1's like, do you do anything ad hoc? You patched last week, great. You're level 1, right? Whereas level 5, it's like, hey, is your management, are you continuously making improvements? And this is a really good way to measure what you're at. And it's going to be a requirement for anybody working for the DoD, which, by the way, is like most of the U.S. So it's a cool thing.
And what I love about measuring your maturity model is it helps you plan what you need to do next, right? And do I need to implement a new technology, a new process, or what have you?
And that's what a lot of the existing compliances don't have, is any kind of maturity model. Like, there's no PCI maturity model. You're just PCI, and then you're done. And how do you get more funding for things above PCI when your company thinks that you're fine?
You call Jeff Mann and ask for super PCI man.
Well, since you gave me an entree, hopefully. I liked how you characterized, Paul, the differences in organizations by mature and immature. I think that's probably a good way to do it. Having done PCI for so many years, I tend to deal with mostly immature organizations. And immature organizations that they didn't really think about security until they were held their feet to their fire for whatever reason, and in this case being PCI. What I find interesting about mature organizations, they tend to be financial services, companies doing business with the federal government, companies that are regulated. At the end of the day, though, I don't think it's a mischaracterization to say that those companies are mature because they were held feet to the fire much earlier on by something that was more or less a compliance standard or a regulatory standard.
Right, but there are also companies out there that are at the same length in business time, but don't even know that they need to be at a mature state. right?
Oh, I agree.
So,
and there's many companies like that, and again, back in the PCI world, they haven't really given much thought to security until they had to, and they don't want to do anything more than what they have to do, and so they're introduced to the PCI data security standards. They want to check and they want the bare minimum to get the box checked. Yes. They want to spend as little, do as little, and it's not. I call it willful ignorance. They don't know what they don't know. They don't know that they should be doing more. They don't know that they really should be doing this, whether PCI is asking them to do it or not. And
they're managing to the biggest risk. And there are a lot of smaller merchants who are just going to, accept that risk of non-compliance and not try to meet it because they figure, the odds are in their favor. And business is really all about not spending anything that you don't absolutely have to. So from a certain standpoint, they're doing the right thing if they're getting away with it.
But or depending on the time of year, the board is just saying blindly, we're going to accept the risk.
Yeah.
That's the other uphill battle that a lot of orgs face, right? Whether you're a medium, large enterprise or a large enterprise, right? There's a board that's involved there, and their decisions and the way that they're pushing the value and strategy and vision really affects a lot with what's going on down inside of the business. Unfortunately, all of the compliance sets that we deal with on a daily basis don't take that into account, right? They don't take into account what the board does. They don't take into account the teeth if the board makes the wrong decision, right? They're not checking board level what the heck is going on, right? What I was going to say to your point earlier, Paul, was that when we started Red Lion, right, we started as a pen testing firm, general security firm, and the more that we worked with companies, right, the more that we helped them through the process, we developed the methodology of security is not where you start, compliance is where you start. You start there because that gets you doing the basics, right? And the methodology isn't ours, let's be honest, right? But you can drive budget, right, and drive what's going on inside of the business by using compliance sets as that catalyst, right? So security versus compliance, you can always be secure, but you can use the compliance, like she was saying, as the aluminum bat.
But that's how you end up with really ineffective programs and the check the box once a year security awareness training. That what is that really doing for your company? Is it doing anything? Or, if it's the difference between an actual effective program that you could develop, but compliance says you only have to do it once a year, so we're only doing it once a year.
Agreeing with that statement, how do you get a company to go from the bare minimum, check the box mindset to we really should be embracing this and doing more, or frankly taking PCI seriously as an example and actually doing what it says rather than simply doing some bare minimum to get a checkbox. So how do you get the companies to move from A to B?
Yeah, I'd like to hear from John and Alex a little bit on this as practicing CISOs, right? Because I think this is an interesting challenge you guys have to face going into an organization, right? Is what is driving decision making at the executive level? Is it to be compliant? Is it to be secure? Or is it both? How are you guys kind of managing through that in your organizations? Alex, I know you're new at Anschutz, but you've been at Blue Cross Blue Shield a while, John. So how is this playing out for you? What is that driver that you're getting kind of brought down from the executive team? Is it security or compliance or both?
It's security, and partly for the reasons that I can't go to the board and tell them I'm not HIPAA compliant, right? It's been around since '96. It's not.
I was going to ask you that too, right? There are certain compliance standards where, your board's probably not going to say, yeah, that HIPAA thing, right, John? Throw it out the window.
But it goes back to exactly what you said, Paul. Of we've adopted a framework that I can map and show how I meet HIPAA, how I meet GLBA, how I meet whatever state privacy law wants to be invented next. And then the board sees that maturity, and if I show them where I've got gaps and where I need to move the needle, based upon our risk appetite, right, that we kind of talked about, that we'll get the funding, we'll move it forward, right? So it's really, I think it's difficult. There are some, PCI is unique in the sense that there is a checkbox, right? You have a ASV and you have a QSA, and they say you are compliant, right?
Maybe.
HIPAA doesn't have that. GLBA doesn't have that. Right?
That's not an automatic, but continue.
So it's a little bit, I think, easier, at least in my regulatory enforcements, to build a program around it and show maturity over time rather than having to consistently produce a certificate, right? Which I guess PCI is a little bit more driven towards that.
But once you have the certification or whatever you want to call it, you're compliant, then you need to have start working on risk management if you really want to be able to show the importance of what's above and beyond, and why should we fix it because it's this much threat.
So what are the next steps to maintain what we've got and show forward progress?
Yeah.
Alex,
that's what I was going to say in relation to Matt's question. I think risk management is the most important out of all of these. It is going to, if you think about it, sit above security and compliance, and that's what I have found has been the best way to drive which direction to go. Talking about what are the risks, the business risks that are going to affect your organization, and then how is it that you can take steps to reduce those risks, right? So maybe that is maybe that's implementing more security controls. Maybe that is being more compliant to some external regulations. It depends completely on what your risks are, how big those risks are, and then it's going to take time too. I've run programs at companies of various different maturity levels, and it takes lots of time for people to really understand the risk management perspective and understand what the effects can be if one of those risks are realized. And as you go through the process, it will evolve. It will really evolve, and then you have a much better chance of moving in the right direction than either trying to tackle it from a security perspective or from a compliance perspective.
I want to direct the next one at Jim. Hi, Jim. Sorry. One of the notions that I frequently have heard over my security career are, well, if you're compliant, you're not secure, right? So you're never done, right, Jim?
Right. So, I would agree with that. To go back to the risk discussion a little bit, I think there's something to tease out there that it was mentioned that some of the more mature security programs and organizations that have mature security programs have been in highly regulated environments for a while, so financial services and others. And I think, based upon what I see, and we, in the Open Group, we do some work with risk management standards, you'd find a pretty high correlation between the companies that have effective risk management programs and then effective security programs. So I think, to Alex's point, the idea that risk is maybe the most important thing out of security and compliance seems true to me. Companies that really understand where they have risk and where to mitigate that risk are going to have effective security programs. I don't know that you could say the same thing about compliance. I mean, sometimes there'll be things in compliance regulations that are not necessarily areas where you have risk. So I think that's kind of an underpinning to this whole discussion that needs to be discussed.
Yes. Josh has transformed himself into a diagram.
This is something that Scott and I came up with a while ago. And
is there any way that you can make that any bigger?
And can you provide it as a paper target at the shooting range?
Yes, I can do it second. First,
that's actually a good idea,
right?
That's okay.
I'm sharing the screen with Ron, and then we're sharing with 14 other people, so I apologize. But the idea is that if you can't see it, we'll throw it up on the website. But the idea is that IT and system admin, information security, compliance, and business all share a lot of pieces, and they all converge on risk management. And this is a symbiotic relationship. As much as some people think it's parasitic one way or the other, as much as some people think it's adversarial one way or the other, or both ways, antagonistic, whatever you want to talk about, realistically, there's a significant amount of overlap and collaboration, stakeholder ownership, a responsibility, etc. And they converge. All of these things converge in risk management. And it's been said by several of you who said that, risk defines, Scott, I think it said that risk, accepting the risk by the board is a problem. Somebody else said that, compliance is an aspect of risk management, and so on and so forth. And this arose out of a discussion we had with a potential client. And we went, it's interesting. And it just sort of fell out of our heads onto the paper. And it really is that risk is where all of these things converge. But by God, they're all responsible for all of it.
Yeah, and I think
you've got about 2/3 of the cyber defense matrix on here.
Interesting. I didn't even think about that.
Where do developers fall into this?
So that's an interesting one. This is more based around infrastructure at the time. Developers would be
over in the applications interfaces side.
Yeah, applications interfaces as part of it, and compensating controls as part of it. They're this is a good question. I don't know. It's not something we thought about at the time.
Now, where it says business, understand that we're bastardizing that, and that's a lot of functions put together, right? And realistically, it's the relationship between all of the different pieces that add into risk management.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges with some of the regulatory requirements, and I'm going to use PCI as an example. How do you do the risk component to identify what of PCI applies to me and doesn't apply? What are the risks that I need to mitigate in PCI? PCI is kind of this all or none discussion, right? It says, here's the 12 domains of PCI DSS. If you want to report on compliance, you have to do them all. Risk isn't really factored, the risk discussion isn't really factored into that requirement per se.
Not exactly, but finish your thought.
Yeah,
and then I'll rip you to shreds.
Okay. It won't be the first time today, and it won't be the last.
I'm going to let you finish.
Mini ripping.
But where I think, what I think is missing in some of these regulatory frameworks is the concept of risk management, the ability to identify where critical risks are, and then how to apply the specific controls to meet the compliance requirement, but not necessarily have to meet every single thing because you may not see a risk there. And I'd like to see more of that risk with compliance and security coming into play. I think, Josh, your diagram does a really good job. Risk management sits in the middle, and all these other pieces are influenced or should be influenced by it. Mm-hmm. I'm just not sure that all the regulatory requirements take the risk aspect into account.
I agree with your premise, but risk is actually a part of PCI. It's in requirement 12.
Which line? Jeff, which line?
Here we go.
Don't quote me. It's 12 something. But
my God, Jeff doesn't know something in PCI.
Well, it's because I've been away from it for so long. But rest assured, it's in requirement 12.
It lives in your heart. We get it.
It does. But where PCI is problematic for most companies is, there's 400 some odd boxes to check, if you will. Mm-hmm. One of the boxes that everybody likes to beat up on, and I would too, is, minimum 7-character password. That's one box. But there's another box that says perform an annual risk assessment, and that risk assessment should include things like the results of your intrusion detection systems, all the logs and outcomes and events that you've investigated over the previous year, the way that your systems and your network has evolved and changed over the year, the way you've had to respond to incidents, the way you've had to upgrade systems, the success or failure of your patch management program, your vulnerability management program. All that's supposed to be rolled into this thing called a risk assessment, and that's an equally weighted box to make sure you're using minimum 7-character length passwords. So it's no wonder.
Do you have to take actions on the assessment?
You're absolutely supposed to. It's supposed to roll into how you execute everything that the other 12 PCI requirements require you to do.
So you're using compliance to raise awareness about security shortcomings?
You can. I mean, it's in there. Well, nobody ever does it because, I have to do a risk assessment. Let's do a tabletop exercise and do it for 30 minutes and call it a day. And
check.
I agree. If your security program is weak and you can use compliance to further that program, there's some benefit to that. However, the issue that I have with that is if I'm using compliance as the driver, once I'm compliant, how do I then convince the board or management to then spend more time and resources on security? Because they're going to come back, right? They're going to come back and say, well, we're compliant now. How do if I've used that as the driver and not other risk-based decisions, other risk-based factors, how do I get security done?
You could
Well,
show.
compliance is one risk, but there are other risks.
Wendy and then Josh.
Go ahead, Wendy. I'm sorry.
What you have to do is convince them that the risk of noncompliance is one business risk, and then you have to convince them that there are other risks to the business that come from security that compliance doesn't address. And so, if you can convince them that those risks are equally probable to the one of noncompliance, then that's where you get your budget spent.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's
Josh?
not only a likelihood discussion
entirely, but that's okay. I'm totally fine with that. Maybe I misunderstood Wendy, but I'm going to say that my answer is that if you get you asked Paul, if you get compliant, how do you get them to spend more money on more security, more compliance, more everything?
I said resources, not money, but okay.
Well, okay.
Could be money. Could be people.
Headcount costs money. Stuff costs money. You get the idea. Your cigars cost money, and that's important for compliance because without cigars, Paul gets cranky. So we have Ron actually mentioned CMMC earlier. CMMC is not a Boolean yes or no checkbox compliance. CMMC has levels and layers. It's levels, right, Ron? Am I correct there?
5 levels.
Five levels.
True or false would be Boolean. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry?
True or false would be never mind.
0 or 1.
We're not looking for Boolean answers, okay?
Yeah, stop bullying me. I mean,
Love the
but it's the better compliance regimes, the better compliance standards are actually levels, maturity levels, and same with security. To be honest with you, how you measure security should not be am I secure or am I not secure. It's not a binary discussion or decision. It's how secure am I, and it's very difficult to measure some aspects of security. I don't think anybody would argue that. It's very easy to measure some aspects of security.
I'm glad you brought that up, Josh, because in our kickoff questions, it was define secure and compliant, and then we immediately started talking about security. Secure and security, I think, are two distinctly different things, if nothing else at the belief level, the conception level.
No, I like that. That's actually a really good point. And being compliant and performing compliance are sometimes two very different things. Because, dear God, we found some people really screwing it up.
No, they are two different things, period.
Yeah.
And I think one is more mythical. I think the idea of secure is what most companies and organizations and even a lot of people in our industry think is there's this belief that we get to this state where we can't be breached or compromised. Everything is protected, everything is secure. Whereas security, I think most of us would agree, if not all of us would agree, implies the ongoing nature, we're never done, we have to be diligent and vigilant, and there's always something else to do. That security is much more the process, the ongoing.
Yeah, all it's doing is adjusting the likelihood of a threat to cause an impact to your organization.
It goes back to the moniker
and that's a constant process, right? So you should constantly be reevaluating because the risk of something one day could change the next day. You have to take in all those factors and then reprioritize based on the reassessment of risk.
Oh, absolutely.
It goes back to what's been pounded into every security and compliance person's head. The people who do the defense and the security work have to be right 100% of the time, whereas the bad guys only have to be wrong once.
But we proved that theory wrong on the previous.
Yeah, you missed the previous
one.
I'm sure you did. Thank you for proving that wrong. But unfortunately, until the previous episode, right, this has been the cadence that has been fed to us, right? And everybody buys into it. So how do you get out of that?
Oh, we changed that in the previous segment, right?
Well, it's kind of.
So you're saying watch the previous segment again?
Well, Bill established that, see if I can capture this correctly from Bill, is that attackers can be wrong, and then right? But defenders can be wrong or missing stuff as long as you accept that in the risk. That's okay.
Well, we're humans.
Right.
We all miss stuff.
Or it's stuff that may not matter.
Instead of trying to be secure, you try and manage risk. And as part of the risk equation that there is a probability that something will happen. And if everyone is on the same page about the likelihood and impact of those risks, then you have to accept that at some point some of these risks are going to be realized.
Yeah, and focus on
Absolutely.
resiliency. That's why, like the NIST CSF, out of the 5 foundations, 2 are dedicated to I've been breached, right?
Right.
Respond and recover. And it's super important, right?
And
yeah,
of course,
we forget about aspects of the recovery domain sometimes. It's just one of those things. It's kind of an afterthought when we're out building. I've seen this a lot. Is we're always about trying to protect the environment. We're trying to prevent attack. So we're not thinking about recovery. Look at all the ransomware attacks this year and how many people were not in a position to recover. Right. Sometimes we forget about that domain, which is why I love that domain in the NIST cybersecurity framework, so we don't forget about it. But a lot of organizations don't put the efforts into aspects of that recovery domain when something actually goes wrong.
It's not as fun as buying a new
Of course, it's not sexy, right? Who wants to deal with backups and recovery procedures and all this other stuff?
Shelfware.
Yeah.
Let me say it. Yay, shelfware, right? But to everybody who's on the cast, right? The question that I have is using compliance and security, right? How do you go about identifying your unknown unknowns, right? Using the two methodologies, right? And of course, there are a lot of frameworks that we can fall back on. It's really easy to say, well, go out and do everything NIST, right? What's the methodology behind figuring out your unknown unknowns?
Well, it's simple. We have a whole thing on a pen test, right? Coming up later.
Yep. Right, that's an easy answer. Go deeper.
So if you're looking at unknowns,
we will
and we're going to talk about ERM some more, like you got to start at what does the business want to do, right? You got to look at what the business wants to do from a strategy perspective, what it takes to execute that, and then you identify the risk, and then you eventually could get to an unknown, right? And then if it happens to be a cyber risk part of that, then you've got to figure out how to measure that with risk indicators, either leading or lagging, right? And make sure that when you measure that, then you can try and get into some things that you might not have seen before. But recently,
can you get more alcohol, please?
Yeah. Not on film, no.
Yeah, not on tape.
Yeah, no.
For the record,
yes, Jeff, please.
PCI 12.2 is where you find the risk analysis. I couldn't let that hang.
So I think one of the problems that we have in security in the security world is that risk management isn't sexy. It's not something that people are talking about at like hacker conferences or even like some of the bigger security conferences. People aren't getting into that field. They want to break stuff, and they want to they want to come up with the next O-Day, but we need more people doing risk management that understand security, not just the risk management people that want to get into spreadsheets and work on finance or whatever, but like security-minded risk people are.
Well, out of curiosity, then, based on that,
Bravo,
for our
April.
practitioners,
well said, April.
Thank you.
John, Alex, where is risk done in your organization?
As of November, risk reports to me. So all of enterprise risk management is now under my purview.
Is it a separate function other than security,
Absolutely.
other than compliance?
Yeah, whole separate director team, the whole bit. Yeah.
Anyone else?
Yeah, same here. That I'm responsible for enterprise risk management. So back to April's point, I totally agree. But I think that is one of the big disconnects that we have had for a long time in security is that we've thought about security for security's sake in whatever way that manifests, but really security should be done for risk management, and we definitely need more people that are looking at that aspect of it. People at hacker conferences might not be interested in risk management, but the people that are interested in risk management are some of the people that were brought up earlier. Your board, the folks in your business that are trying to get things done, they care about risk management because that's their world. And I think the sooner that we as an industry realize that, the better off we're going to be.
So I want to go to Jim again from Open Group on this conversation for a second. Is Open Group's done a lot of work here. Where are your outlets to help educate the risk management folks, right? How are we engaging with the risk folks? How are we educating? Where are those conferences, those events where people can learn about risk management?
Yeah, so good question. We published the Open Fair standards of the factor analysis of information risk. We turned into a couple of standards from the Open Group. I would say the outlet that is getting the most traction in terms of educating large organizations about quantitative risk management is the FAIR Institute. So it's something that Risk Lens, the people who originated FAIR, have done, and they do an annual conference. They're doing some things at RSA, and there is a decent amount of evangelism about the need for quantitative risk analysis and appropriate methods, and really using FAIR in this case as the way to communicate with boards on how much risk is present in a given environment.
Good source.
I really like the FAIR model. We did a great interview on that a year or so ago. What I think drives the hacker culture nuts about compliance is that or risk management, right, is that you're saying that, yes, we're vulnerable in some way, and that just drives us nuts because we know that any type of vulnerability, we want to figure out a way to do something with it. And I don't know why it's been largely ignored in the hacker kind of conferences and culture.
Well, because it's not sexy, and it's hard to what funds conferences.
Actually,
sponsors.
let me throw something at somebody else here. Hey, Ron, got a question for you. When you're out there looking at potential investment targets, which is sexier to you? Something that maybe can break stuff, or something that can manage risk? I'm saying this crudely, but you know what I'm saying?
So it depends on where you're going. There's a lot of corporate companies out there who've got their own proprietary risk management tools. So if you came to me with a better risk management tools, that market, it's kind of a dry market because there's only, last time I checked, there were only 2,000 companies in the Fortune 2000, right? They've all got decent risk management. When you get outside of those 2,000, you don't have the sophistication to do a proper risk management study. And most of those folks couldn't follow this conversation.
Wow. That's fascinating. Thank you.
Well, this is one of the reasons I like the CMMC, because it makes my doctor's office and these small vendors think about these processes. The problem is just IT is just way too complex. And you've seen a lot of people just doing things like, you know what, I could do CIS, I could harden my stuff, or I could just buy Microsoft Azure for Fed and be like 99% compliant with everything the DoD's asking because Microsoft's set it up like that for me. That's kind of how people outside of this loop really think about these kind of issues.
I'm sorry, I'm going to go directly against you, Ron, and say that IT is not complex. What is complex is the body of knowledge required to protect an organization dependent on what IT they bring in, right? So if they do everything in G Suites, right? If they do anything in Amazon, it's trying to understand the shared security model. And a lot of people who say, well, this looks good for now, right? They are not thinking ahead to be able to implement that from a strategy at the gate.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. It's just when you get out of sort of corporate folks and you get into these small businesses, we don't even have people there. And I guess one of the reasons I'm a little frustrated is that I joined the board of this thing called Defending Digital Campaigns. And you're literally working with people, maybe 5 to 10 people, none of them in IT. And we're trying to help them keep the Russians or the Chinese or the Republicans or the Democrats, out of the campaign. And there's nobody in IT at these places. There's literally like the only people close to IT are like people who are counting tweets or trying to manage the website or that kind of thing. So that's most of America. Once you get out of people who are well resourced, another way to think about this is Wendy actually coined a term called security poverty line. I came up with something called cyber poverty line and then found out that she did that. The conversation for people below this like mythical line, they don't even follow what we're talking about. So how do you get them to think about risk management?
And there's a term above that poverty line. We call it the enterprise.
Yeah.
Every vendor out there is focused on selling to the enterprise because that's where the money is.
So I participate in this thing called the Cyber Moonshot, and we were talking about your first two questions. What does it mean to be secure? And I basically said, if you have a sense of hygiene and you have a sense of the ability to hunt inside your network, you're above the poverty line. Because there's a lot of enterprises out there who they're very compliant, but they don't have a red team. They don't have, like a threat team or anything like that. I would claim that they're not secure, even though they can show you PCI, CIS, that kind of stuff. I would claim that they're actually below the poverty line.
I'm going to throw this out there. So, and tie again back to risk management is the smaller companies until, I don't know when the mandate on the DoD was, but until now, they may have made the business decision of, I cannot sell more product or more services with a more secure environment. So I'm making that decision to not invest in IT or in information security because it's not going to move my bottom line. Now, if they can't sell anything without it, that readjusts their management decision, and they may begin investing it in a different way.
And that comes back to what you were saying earlier, Paul, about how we don't like to know that things are insecure and admit it. But what we're really doing through this process is making the people, like the board, for example, understand and have to accept, or they know about it once it's a risk. It's known. It has to be dealt with one way or another.
And that does support the hacker culture, is bringing those exposure. I mean, in the next segment, we'll talk about some of the first instances of hacking, right? And it's about making a vulnerability or exposure known that was previously unknown.
But, and maybe we'll talk more about it in the next segment, but to a large degree, when we bring that up, if it hasn't happened to them, it could be construed as FUD.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
And we all hate FUD, yet it's kind of necessary.
Well, more often than not, the only way we really learn is when we get smacked, right? When really bad stuff happens to us, it forces us to grow.
Right.
And trying to have business owners understand that there is a way of doing this and it isn't difficult really is on us to do. Mm-hmm. And I would venture to say we failed at that. Okay?
I would agree.
We've sat back as IT people, as hackers, right? As people that do security, and we play in our own sandbox. We do not reach out to business owners. We do not let people know what we know, right? Well, gee, that keeps a paycheck coming in. That's a real simple answer. But we have fundamentally failed at sharing this kind of information for businesses to be able to use, learn, and grow with.
I mean, the flip side of that is many smaller businesses don't get interested in security until there's a breach or a compliance mandate.
Why should they wait, though?
One of the first consulting, when I first started a consulting business, was this software company all of a sudden said, we need to care about security because in order to do business with this large client, they've put down this security mandate and we have to show compliance. It wasn't any particular standard. It was just like, here's like, to do business with us, you got to meet these requirements.
You must be this tall to ride the ride.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, a lot of folks
then they started caring about security.
They ask me, are you high trust compliant? And I say, no, I don't have any customers asking if I'm high trust compliant. Mm-hmm. If we began losing business because I'm not there, then it might make some sense, right? Other Blues plans that have significant government business, that sort of thing, they're all high trust compliant because it's going to move their bottom line. Right.
So I have a question for some of the CISOs who are on the call. Most of this conversation's been about internal security, internal compliance. But when it comes to third-party risk and third-party compliance, one, how many vendors are you using in that space? Are they consistent? And do you even believe the results that you're getting from that?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Ron, are you talking about like vendor management kind of third-party?
Vendor management, indirect technical assessments of them. I don't really want you to name. Some of these guys do different. They do amazing things, like they infer security profiles based on DNS and URL shorteners and stuff like that. Others are trying to amass self-assessment questionnaires from the masses out there. So there are different ways to measure it. But then, for your business, do you believe them and factor them into anything?
Yeah, I think that those types of services are all great data points. But I haven't found anything yet that I can say, instead of the processes that I've already put in place to do reviews, these are going to replace them. There's many vendors out there that'll give you, a score for a company or something like that. Yeah, that's an interesting data point. It's interesting to see when those scores go up or down. Does that mean I can use that instead of performing my own assessment of that vendor? No, but it is definitely an interesting data point.
Yeah, it's a data point for us. This year, I really instructed my team to get into open up our threat intelligence program internally to our top risk vendors. There's a lot of companies that do it. It's all open source intelligence. I'm not going to spend money on it when I can go to Shodan for $500 a year and run on the same things. I think most important that folks aren't doing is they need to start and understand what is the impact to the business of this third party, either not providing services anymore or breaching your data, and then working backwards from there, because the volume of information and vendors is ever growing.
And that's a risk assessment at the end of the day, right? Yep. It's a basic risk assessment to understand the risk posed by that third party, and then based on the type of data, where it's stored, et cetera, you're going to apply, I would imagine, a set of controls that you'd want them to have in place to continue.
The hardest thing we're struggling with now is I can say, these are riskier vendors, and this could be the impact if they're breached. I'm having trouble understanding and calculating the likelihood. Like I say, out of my 100 vendors, these 5 are risky.
Because do they publish these vendors with a lower score? Or 3 months from now they produce another report and say they were breached? Or do they do that with the higher scoring ones? If it's a higher scoring vendor, when they're breached, does that impact their score? And what are the metrics on that? Like
when Equifax got breached, I think it was Security Scorecard that basically said, look, we said this was a risk 3 months, 4 months before, and I think Senator Warren even put that in her report to Congress on it. So I thought that was a pretty good moment for that industry.
Absolutely.
So I have a question for the practitioners or anyone in the group. In my experience over the years, I had a lot of customers that would be categorized as immature. We've talked a little bit about what makes companies do security or compliance or something, and compliance being a driver, being breached being a driver. We've just introduced our customers demanding it of us. I've had a lot of customers, and it sort of falls into the checkbox mentality, but they would ask me, what are our competitors doing? We want to do no more, no less than anybody else in our industry, so that we can be construed as being in the realm of best practice, or no more, no less. It's sort of a variation.
Have to be the fastest runner in the zombie apocalypse.
Something like that.
So if you try to,
do you still see that? Those of us that are consultants, advisors, whatever, or practitioners, do you get that sense anymore?
So if you plot everything on go ahead,
Wendy.
What I see is a combination of people looking at their peers and doing that sort of thing. The benchmarking, which is they can't convince their management to spend any more if their peers aren't. But if your peers are really bad at security, which has happened to me, then you really can't use a benchmark as a motivator. The other thing that I see, though, is organizations who choose aspirational role models, other organizations that they know are good at security, and they say, we want to be like Google, we want to be like Facebook or Microsoft or whatever. So they have 2 different role models that they're measuring themselves against.
That's funny because, Wendy, to your point, back before the Target breach, and I was actively a QSA at that time, Target was considered within the PCI world to be an aspiring company because they had committed resources to a security program. They were doing it. They had a huge staff. I don't know what the exact number, and some of this might be folklore, but they were looked up upon by a lot of retailers and merchants and people within the PCI space as a company that was doing it right. And then, boom, turns out they weren't.
Yeah. I'd argue they were still doing it right, but mistakes were made, and everybody makes mistakes.
I don't understand this idea of not wanting to do more than the competitor. I mean, if you're looking at buying a piece of software and there's 4 different vendors that make the same kind of software, and one of them is compliant with 3 things and one of them is compliant with nothing, or you need FedRAMP or you need something, that's a differentiator.
But unless you're losing business because of it, you're not incentivized to do it. I mean, it's finance at the end of the day. Right? If that competitor who has more compliance checkboxes is selling more than you, then sure. But if you're the market leader and you're not compliant, then what's going to be the business incentive to get that done?
Or the price for the service. That could be the other factor, right? You have 4 vendors that do the exact same thing. The business says, I want to go with the cheapest one, which is maybe the one that doesn't have all those controls in place.
Hasn't spent any money on compliance.
Right. So they can be cheaper, right?
Well, compliance and security are always looked at. Compliance and security are always looked at as cost centers. Okay? Get us out of the mentality of being a cost center and being a profit center. Figure out how compliance and security is an additive to the bottom line of what the business does, sells, moves, so on and so forth.
That could almost be a separate panel discussion.
It could be.
Almost. Totally.
But it goes back to the risk management discussion, right? If I can prove through my investments in security and compliance that I am at a lower risk to have a breach, have brand reputation damage, lose customers, lose customer data, that's the measurable piece I think we can get to as an industry. I don't think we're there yet. But I think those are some of the drivers that could move us away from being considered a cost center into a business enabler. I don't know that we're a revenue generator at the end of the day, but we can be.
Well, it depends on the business.
Yeah.
But like if you're government, security is a revenue generator because you're able to move government forward, right? If you're a security house, right, you're doing pen tests, you're doing, it's kind of a no-brainer. But if you're a mom and pop pizza shop, security is definitely not going to be a generator. It's going to be a detractor, right? So in everything that we've talked about, from risk management to compliance to security, the bottom line is it depends on the business. Is that a fair thing to say?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It is. Yep.
You are all unique snowflakes.
And it's not so much fitting the business to the compliance, but it's fitting compliance to the business, right? Because in every business, there's going to be certain pieces and certain participles of compliance that you use versus a competitor, which does the exact same thing. They're going to use different parts of the compliance set. Right? There is no one end-all, be-all. This is the de facto way we need to do this to manage risk solution.
Now, Scott, participle is a really big word for you.
Oh, I know. I know it is. And
wrong too.
And
he spit a little on me when he said
wrong,
it.
But I do it for Josh. Okay? I do it for Josh because it makes him cringe.
I hate you. I hate you.
Now, the question is it dangling or not?
No, we're not talking about Chads, okay?
Scott,
Larry,
thesaurus is not a dinosaur, right?
No, it is.
It's an interesting point that's raised. There's no one-size-fits-all in compliance. There's no one-size-fits-all in security. There's no... It is a difficult problem. We talked about binary solution sets and how they really don't exist. We talked about how maturity levels and for compliance and security are much more mature in and of themselves. We've talked about the different viewpoints where compliance drives security, security drives compliance. I prefer to think that they drive each other, and some ways compliance helps to drive budgets for security, and some ways security helps to drive the functionality of compliance, and they interact in a, as I said, symbiotic fashion.
I think that's go ahead, Josh. Finish, and then we have to wrap up. Yep.
However you believe this is all of these factors are things that you have to consider in your programs. Go ahead, Paul, please.
I was just going to say I thought those were great closing remarks, and with that will conclude this panel discussion. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
You.
And that's a wrap.
Happy holidays.